This is Scott and retired Sheriff Rich Stanek as the badge turns. And I wanted to get Rich on today, just us, to really kind of dig into the recent events in Minneapolis, the shooting of Renee Good, which occurred when we record a couple days ago now today. This is Monday, and we'll have this out and released probably either this evening or on Tuesday. And we invite, as we do on all of our podcast, any comments, any interaction, engagement. Again, we want to be able to put the story out there. We want to put the details out there. This is certainly something that hits close to home with Sheriff Stanek in his backyard. As former sheriff in Hennepin County, a longtime resident in the greater Minneapolis area, for sure. Let me just jump right in. I think, everyone's seen footage. We'll dig into that in a little bit. But one thing that stands out, and no shortage of opinions, what do you think of the rush to judgment on both sides so far?
Well, Scott, it's important for the listeners to understand. I spent 40 years in public service policing, both in the city of Minneapolis, Hennepin County, and the state of Minnesota. I patrolled this very neighborhood in these streets where this tragic shooting occurred. And like a lot of people who heard about it and have seen, videos, we've been watching TV and the news, people commenting. I'm not so sure why these people comment, because they got nothing to say other than political rhetoric. It's not grounded in fact, it's assumptions. And when you assume things, well, the old adage, when you assume something. But I would say this, I took a look at the shooting immediately after it occurred. I don't think people should rush to judgment. I think they should allow the investigation to finish, to go on. There's a lot of evidence out there. There's evidence from body-worn cameras, squad videos, cell phone videos, eyewitness statements, maybe ring-mounted cameras on residences. There's a lot of people who know something about it in the job of the investigator. And I managed investigations for the city of Minneapolis and as the Hennepin County Sheriff for, like I said, a good 25, 30 years, and seen a lot of these over the years, including lethal incidents like this one. It's tragic that Ms. Good died during this incident, but you've really got to look at all the evidence to understand how it came about, who's culpable, and what the next steps might be.
Again, no shortage of, and I was mindful not to go down a deep dive on TikTok or anywhere else. And to your point, yeah, there's a lot of footage out there, a lot of different angles, what's available, who's leading the investigation or not. So can you speak to, Sheriff, the working relationship between ICE and local law enforcement? And is this normal? And I'll clarify normal as far as right now it seems to not be with the local authorities. What generally should be the relationship, and where does this sit currently?
Yeah, well, a couple of things, Scott, and for your listeners, our listeners out there. One, this incident, as tragic as it is, does not define Minnesotans, right? This is not who we are or how we do our business. Normally, local law enforcement has a very good working relationship with federal law enforcement. But the problem with this is purely politics. Everybody's got an opinion, just like guns, abortion, Second Amendment, First Amendment. They've got an opinion about immigration as well. And so politics plays a key part of this and will as it comes to fruition through this investigation. But I would say that normally, and it's ironic because usually Minneapolis police would be working with federal law enforcement, that being immigration customs enforcement. And by the way, police officers, as they're called, are fully sworn federal law enforcement officers. They receive the same training as local law enforcement here in our communities across Minnesota, whether you're a state trooper, a deputy sheriff, or a local municipal police officer. The difference is, They work for a different employer, that being the federal government, just like I worked for Hennepin County, the residents, or I worked for the city of Minneapolis and their residents. I would say that, the working relationship between the two, it's ironic because this shooting happens, or any event could have happened up until now and may happen again to some degree. Usually you've got a local law enforcement on the inside working with their partners. In this case, they're on the outside looking in, which is not a good place to be. And you've got federal law enforcement versus local law enforcement. Based on what I saw over the weekend with some of the protests and the video and some of the things that were said, I don't think local police are any more popular than immigration customs enforcement officers. The public generally can't tell the difference.
Yeah.
Or maybe don't want to tell the difference. And I think, 99% of the people are good, but there's that 1 or 2% who push it a little bit farther. I saw Minneapolis officers literally chase down the street with rocks and ice balls. That's because we're in Minnesota and we have snow. And so when you pick it up, it turns into a solid chunk of ice and you throw that, it's worse than get hit by a rock, for gosh sakes.
Sure.
So I don't think you can tell the difference, but usually you've got a very good relationship. In this case, they do not. The Minneapolis police has decided they're not going to work with immigration customs enforcement in this targeted action. And you've got kind of two sides of the line, but Minneapolis police do have a responsibility to the residents of Minneapolis to protect them, to keep them safe. Those that want to exercise their First Amendment right through civil discourse or protests. What the residents don't get to do is cross that line where it becomes violent, criminal, damage to property, or assaultive in behavior. That's what I saw this past weekend. That is somewhat what Ms. Good portrayed during this incident. ICE had a lawful right to ask her questions, tell her to step out of her vehicle. She was obstructing legal process. She was refusing to obey a lawful order. And when she drove away, she drove that vehicle at the ICE officer, whether intended to or not. I don't know. I wasn't there. And all the evidence is not in. But if you have a 3/4 1-ton vehicle coming at you, there's not much you can do other than defend yourself, and defend himself. He did, which resulted in firing 3 shots. And unfortunately, Miss Good died as a result. But that doesn't make it right. It certainly doesn't make it wrong. You've got to figure out what's going on. It's the totality of the circumstances, as we say. And that comes from my wisdom and experience as a former detective over many, many, many years and a lot of different investigations.
So and again, I get there's still a lot to be uncovered, right?
Okay.
And the tremendous amount of content that's already out there, and what you talked about already, the rush to judgment and letting things kind of settle and then being able to be pragmatic and look at it. As a former investigator, based on what you've seen, are there events or activities and on both sides, that you see that, yes, the behavior that was demonstrated is, dare I say, justified, or expected is probably not the right word, but when you look at it, is there something from a after action review perspective, which I'm sure these go through extensively, that yes, this should have been handled differently, or this could have been handled differently? Yeah.
I'll give you a perspective on a couple of things that I would do and or should have been done.
Yeah.
First off, I think there should have been a working relationship between Minneapolis police and immigration customs enforcement. Again, you see it in other parts of the country where that relationship works just fine. You see in this part of the country here in Minneapolis, it doesn't work so well. And they've been standoffish. It was like, ICE on one side and Minneapolis police on the other side of the line, and the two never shall meet. Well, They met because something bad happened and both had to respond in different ways. Two, I would have told Mayor Jacob Fry from Minneapolis and the police chief and the governor of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz, be quiet. Quit rushing to judgment. Quit making statements that are not rooted in fact, but rather are assumptions and or political rhetoric. Because all it does is rile people up. It riles up the residents. It riles up the activists, those that are, have a more of a say about what's going on. It certainly is playing to the media, and the media has been nonstop. They've been camped out here now for the last 5 or 6 days,
Sure.
and they're not going away anytime soon. And then you've got images of, protests, violent protests on the national news. I even got a call from overseas earlier today from a news outlet wanting to do an interview. So it's not just here in Minnesota, it's nationwide and it's across the world. It's not a place we want to be. I would have told them, don't rush to judgment, work with your federal law enforcement authority and figure out how to investigate this objectively, fairly, accurately, timely, and then inform the public. If you want to talk about transparency and accountability, which every politician wants to do, that would be the way to do it. There are many questions that are still unanswered, but all you got to do is look on X or the old Twitter or Facebook or any other social media medium, and you'll find somebody has an answer to it. I've even seen now AI is being generated with memes and all kinds of unfactual information. But again, that's what people see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so much. Like I said, yesterday morning, right or wrong, I ended up probably spending 90 minutes just going down a rabbit hole on X, on Twitter. And, the knowing I was going to have this conversation in my mind, I wanted to be as much as I could be informed, right? And have a basis for, even if I was prompting, which was really the intent, because you're the expert here. I'm just on the other side of the camera, just facilitating without a law enforcement background. But the appreciation and respect I have is tremendous. So in that, I want to be informed, right? I want to have a better understanding. So I get it. Not everyone, I'm not saying that puts me into to a certain area of a deeper understanding, but kind of, and I don't want to stay on the quick to judge topic too long, but it is so polarizing, right? Be it the left or right, top or bottom, any of that. There's so many messages out there, and it's driven by it, like you said, AI at this point, which is a whole other topic that we can go down, that gets manufactured and wants to sway a view, and what gets fed into your algorithm is going to kind of prompt the belief system too. So sure, if we can unplug all social media and truly have an open-ended press that just presents it as factual, which I believe still does exist, but you can't help but have opinions in that regard. And when this all comes together, why is it so polarizing, and not naming any news sources? And I try to stay out of watching a lot of it on TV. It helps mental health wise. I will tell you that. It seems like adamant that the local department, the local police are not being allowed to be part of the investigation. Is that just a slant on the story, or is there a jurisdictional piece tied into ICE and how it rolls up within that overall chain of command, if I can say that?
Well, I think it comes from this, Scott. It's really simple for our listeners.
Yeah.
From day one regarding immigration enforcement, the city of Minneapolis mayor, the governor of the state of Minnesota, the Minneapolis police chief has said, we're not going to work with immigration customs enforcement. In fact, they went as far as to say, if you see ICE, call 911 and we'll send local police. Like, what? Oh, what? I had to go back and check. What? Police are the police are us. Two, 15 minutes after this tragic shooting of Miss Good happened, the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Fry, was on the news in a live press conference with the police chief standing at his side. And he said, ICE, get the frick, you'd have to be,
Yeah.
get the frick out of Minneapolis. We don't want you here. Words to that effect.
Yeah.
That's pretty harsh. And then you use vulgarity on top of that. Two, shortly thereafter, the governor of the state of Minnesota, Tim Walz, says to Secretary Kristi Noem, you're the judge, jury, and the executioner. Sorry, but the secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, of whom ICE works for, is akin to the police chief. So you're making statements like this, unbelievable rhetoric, amped way up, not rooted in fact. They're basing this, and then you've got the Minneapolis police chief saying, well, I think she was just trying to drive away. They shouldn't have shot her. I mean, they're passing all these judgments, not thinking about, hey, somebody's got to investigate this. Somebody's got to look into it. Sometimes the facts have to come forward. So if you're the Secretary of Homeland Security, or maybe the President of the United States, or Custom Border Patrol, you're thinking, wait a minute, how objective is that going to be? These are federal officers that are involved. Therefore, the FBI investigates lethal use of force by them. If it was a Minneapolis officer involved, Minneapolis police would investigate the lethal use of force. If it's a combination of the two, if Minneapolis had been working with Immigration Customs Enforcement prior to this tragic death happening, they'd be working together on the investigation. Everybody had their mind made up 15, 20, 25 minutes later. They were basing it off a video they saw, the original video that everybody saw where, a couple ICE agents get out of a pickup truck, walk up to the car, tell Miss Good to get out of her car, and they slip on the ice a little bit. She puts her vehicle in reverse, and then she guns it forward. And when I say gun, I mean her wheels are slipping on the ice. That's the frozen snow we have here in Minnesota this time of year.
Yeah.
She clips the officer. He is in front of the vehicle to some degree, and he reacts defensively, and he fires 3 rounds. One of them kills her. Did he mean to be there? I don't know. That's about the totality of the circumstances. And then 3 days later, a new video comes out. Well, there's a lot of videos in between, but the most compelling video is the video that comes from the involved officer himself. He's got his cell phone out. And by the way, he's a local kid. He lives here in Minnesota. And he starts walking around Miss Good's vehicle, identifying her, taking photos of the license plate around the entire vehicle until he gets to the passenger side, where Miss Good's wife engages the ICE officer in a fairly terse, rude, vulgar conversation, challenging him. And then the ICE officer continues walking to the front of the vehicle to finish his filming of the vehicle. And the wife tries to get back into the car through the passenger door. She's got her hand on the door handle trying to open it. And she says to Miss Good, drive, baby, drive, drive. And Miss Good does. She puts it in gear, goes back a little bit, and then goes forward. Here we have what we have, which is a tragic situation all the way around. People say, well, the ICE officer, his policy says he can't shoot at a moving vehicle. Policy doesn't say you can't defend yourself. And again, defending yourself against a 1/2 or 3/4 ton vehicle, they're not supermen. And it's already slippery out there. And it wasn't someplace he tried to be. It's where he ended up as he was walking around the vehicle. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And then you've got, people comment about that video. Where'd that come from? That's AI generated. It's fake. It's not fake. It's as real as any other video you've seen in relation to this. But that's about what we talk about from law enforcement, gathering up all the evidence, looking at all of it. And then, story comes out that this involved ICE officer had been dragged by a car just a few months earlier, ended up in the hospital, took stitches to his arm and his hand. What do you think's going through his head when he sees another half, 3/4 ton vehicle gunning right at him. This is all part of the split second. And by the way, it is split second. The whole incident took 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 seconds at best. That's a tough place to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing, Scott, I want to say is
Please.
why the ICE officers keep wearing masks, why
Yeah.
they cover their faces. No different than cops cover their faces, or a lot of the protesters cover their faces, but I saw, this happen. And then the next morning, it wasn't even 12 hours since this fatal incident. And they already had pictures of the involved ICE officer on Facebook, on X, asking for people to identify him. Why do they need to identify him? Last time I looked, they weren't police officers or anywhere in his chain of command. And then there were death threats. And this is what the ICE officers face every day. And this is part of the rhetoric from the local and the state elected officials that's ramping people up to where, you've got to take necessary precautions to protect yourself.
No, definitely. And I appreciate that. Yeah.
As I've heard, kind of like when the former governor of Minnesota, Jesse Ventura, out at Roosevelt High School the other day said, this was outright murder. It wasn't self-defense. I'm a Navy SEAL. Self-defense is 1 round, maybe a second round, but when you fire 3 rounds, firepower is superiority. Are you freaking kidding me? Law enforcement is trained to fire until the threat is neutralized. We don't shoot for the tires. We don't shoot to hit you in the knee or the elbow or shoot the gun or the steering wheel out of your hand. That's not the way they're trained. And I'm being objective about this, but some of that bullshit that's out there is absolutely ridiculous. And then you got a guy like Jesse Ventura, who spent 4 years as my governor. I served under him. I was in the Minnesota legislature here when he was governor. And I say, who cares what you think? It is so far astray. Keep it to yourself. That would have been a lot better. Just go back to where you came from over the last 15 years or so since you've been out of office. If you're not helping the situation, you're making it worse.
No, exactly.
I'll probably get a phone call from him going, hey, Rich, what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
I thought we were friends.
Yeah.
Well, we are friends. But come on, you call when you see it.
It's an unfortunate event. It's life altering for both sides. There's ramifications that could be going for years as it relates to it. In this, and I saw some other clips. There was Philadelphia, a sheriff in Philadelphia, basically, don't come here, don't do that. But Chicago was, we welcome you, we work with you. And in this instance, and I guess I'm making an assumption, but Chicago is predominantly blue, so that's not any secret. It's supported. But is it just a political on one side or the other, or what seems to be, and again, this might be an impossible question to answer, but why is it so polarizing? Why are there such different opinions? And I love to say, and sometimes I'm delusional in what I address each and every day from work problems or whatever. It's more a matter of there's not a problem that I can't solve, at least approach it that way. But in this one, I'm not attempting to solve how this is, but as it covers so many, thousands and eventually millions of people, then, you're getting calls from other places on the globe to comment on this, to others, and any maybe even in states and other countries, are they wondering, well, what are you guys doing over here? There's so much discord.
I'm wondering what we're doing over here, but first off, we're going to take away your X access because you're reading it way too much. It is true, though, this Philadelphia sheriff, and I don't talk mean-spirited about any other sheriff, but she's a little misguided. Her rhetoric was really amped up the other day. She basically told ICE, hey, try any of that here and I will arrest you. If you do any enforcement activity, I'm going to arrest you. And last time I saw, the head of ICE said, go ahead and give it a try, which is what we need. Law enforcement fighting with law enforcement. I heard Jacob Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, say it's akin to a war on the streets of Minneapolis, only they got more people, meaning ICE has 2,000 to 3,000 ICE agents here during this surge operation. And he says, and they got bigger guns. what?
Yeah.
What? What? Now we're talking about firepower? I mean,
Right.
shoot, I live here, born and raised in this community. My family lives here. My extended family lives here. I don't want a war on the streets, a civil war in Minneapolis or Minnesota. And then you got Chicago, which I mean, I'm fair about this, but I always
Yeah.
thought that was more of a Democratic controlled city. But you got a police chief who's very reasonable. And he said, look, if you violate the law, if you don't follow lawful orders, if you do stupid things, this might happen to you. You got Grady Judd over in Polk County, Florida, my favorite sheriff, everybody's favorite sheriff, America's sheriff.
Yeah.
You know, every morning he has a cup of coffee
It's
and he
coffee.
talks for
Yep.
5 minutes about current events. And
Yeah.
he says, hey, look, if you do that here, we're gonna, shoot you once, we'll shoot you twice, we'll shoot you 3 times. I mean, I don't know. It people just have to take a step back, for God's sakes. We're all in the same place.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to do the best we can. Nobody that this is about criminals. This isn't about, just going out and finding something to do and cause havoc. But if the political officials would step out of it, let local law enforcement and federal law enforcement do what they're supposed to be doing, for one, it'd be a lot better. I can't bring back Miss Good and the life she lost and the family she leaves behind.
Absolutely.
But she is not, but she is, I was going to say not non-culpable. I'm not so sure that's good use of the English language. She is culpable in some of those things she did to put herself in that position, which resulted in this tragic chain of events, which led to her death. And I think, during the investigation, that will continue to come forward. At some point, the officer will be accountable, whether it's to superiors at the Department of Homeland Security, or maybe a federal court, or maybe a district court here in Minnesota. I don't know, but I believe in due process and the rule of law. That's how I spent the last 40 years doing my job and earning a living. And that's what I'm going to continue to support.
Related to, or just a continued combination, and I won't make any more X references on that, because
Now we're
again,
going to Facebook.
that was on Instagram. No, but over the weekend there's been protests in other cities, and there's been some other events that have occurred, and we've seen this over the last. I think it always exists. People are allowed to protest, right? There's a level of which you need to kind of stay within your lane and do that. I think that's the beauty of the country we live in, is you're able to pronounce your opinions and views on things within reason and all things. With it, if it ramping up, is there something that could be said differently from an administration, or is there something that just needs to be done differently at the local level to help kind of stem the tide of more of these uprisings? And again, it could be fine. People could walk down the street outside of my office sharing their opinions. And if there's no havoc that ensues, then you know what? More power to you to do it. Whatever fuels the fire one way or the other, is there anything that we can do about it that doesn't create this beyond this level of escalation that just makes you wonder what is going on?
Yeah, we need to resurrect Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
Come to Minnesota and mediate this agreement and get things back on track for us between the federal government, local units of government, mayor, governor, president, Department of Homeland Security. This is not who we are. This is not what we asked for. I don't want to be caught in the middle. My family doesn't want to be caught in the middle. My neighbors don't want to be caught in the middle, and yet we are. Sure, we want enforcement of state and federal laws, and we believe in the rule of law. But this is a little bit beyond, and you got to wonder, well, what's going to happen next? When's the next shoe going to drop?
Right.
And then, sure enough, the shoe dropped 48 hours later in Portland, when there was a shooting of a couple alleged, maybe it's true, suspected gang members. I don't know. They didn't sound like they died, but nonetheless, and the protests continue on. And I think the protest will continue this week and in the next weekend. Of course, in Minnesota, we love it because it's the middle of our winter and it's probably about 30 or so degrees today. But hey, maybe it'll get down to -6 and everybody can get a dose of reality this weekend.
Yeah.
If it gets cold again. And I would say this, lastly, I think what pains me the most about watching this after spending 40 years both in public service and law enforcement is like I said, this isn't hard to figure out what happened or why it happened, but you need to put all these things together in the totality of the circumstances. That's why we have a jury of 12. That's why we have people who make objective decisions. But when you got thought and opinion leaders leading a rush to judgment, and then you get the news media with a megaphone and then some, it is absolutely ridiculous. As my wise old mentor told me many times, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And
Yeah.
I'd argue the Minneapolis mayor, the Minneapolis governor, they're not part of the solution. So it only leaves them to be part of the problem, if not the problem.
Yeah.
And this isn't a thing about time's gonna erase. Usually I would say, time and distance is the great equalizer. I don't know on this one. I mean,
Yeah.
5.5 years ago, we were in the news every day and around the world because of George Floyd and the tragic death of George Floyd at the hands of another police officer. Justified, not justified. The courts found him guilty and he's serving time in prison.
Yeah.
But I saw the rhetoric back then, and law enforcement literally took a beating over the last 5.5 years. Minneapolis police are still staffed half of what they were. They were moved to defund the police. Crime skyrocketed. It skyrocketed so bad. I had a hard time thinking about whether I wanted to continue to live in Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis, and raise my family and now my two beautiful grandkids. I can go to Florida. I can go to Tennessee, Nashville, and enjoy my life and get along just fine. But those are the questions that people are asking, and you got to admit they're pretty dang good questions.
Well, Sheriff, I appreciate you taking the time today. Again, this is still a very hot topic, understandably so, in the media. Here we are on the 12th of January, on a Monday, recording this. So a couple days after the events that transpired. To your point, I think I'll just reiterate the rush to judgment. Let's see everything shake out, right? Let's see what comes up. Can there be a reasonable conclusion to this, as far as these are all the facts and then there's a decision rendered ultimately? That would be nice. Does it always end that way? To be determined. But again, I appreciate your time as always. I enjoy these. Hopefully we can get some more insights to our listeners and to our viewers. Here we are in the new year in 26. We're going to continue again at a steady pace to get this content out. Sometimes it'll be a reaction to what's going on. Other times it'll be some proactive comments. But again, as always, Sheriff, thank you for your time. Have a good rest of the afternoon, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Stay safe. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.